Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Welcome to Ignition Sequence. In this episode, we are thrilled to welcome Dr. Rae Wynn-Grant, a large carnivore ecologist, conservationist, and host of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, Protecting the Wild. Dr. Rae, welcome to the Ignition Sequence podcast, and you and I know each other quite well, but say hello to Aisha Lalray.
Hi, Aisha. You and I, we need to know each other better, I think.
Yes, but it's so wonderful to see you. It's been a long time.
I know. It's been pre-pandemic, in fact, right?
Yes, pre-pandemic.
Yeah, we'll get it back. This is a second best.
Yes, absolutely.
So you're both part of the If Then She Can initiative and program. You both have your sculptures, your 3D printed sculptures in the sculpture garden. And, have you ever two met face to face?
We did. So one of the highlights of the If Then collection and the If Then initiative is that right before the pandemic, Aisha, correct me if I'm wrong, was it 2019? I think
it was 2019.
2019, they had a convening and they actually brought all, 120 of us to Texas to meet each other, to fellowship with each other, and also to do some really constructive work. So they did headshots with us. I mean, they provided hair and makeup and wardrobe for headshots for these media kits. We did interviews, we had, networking opportunities. It was so rich and so full, and it was all in service of promoting women in science. And so I know that we met, but
Yes.
we were meeting, hundreds of each other, and it was just a magical couple of days.
It definitely was very magical.
Well, I was going to say, Aisha, Rae and I work together. I know her really well, and we spend a lot of time together. So I'll let you take the first few questions and just ask to your heart's content. I want to hear what you have to ask her.
Yeah, I mean, this is such an awesome opportunity. The other thing that Rae and I have in common, and I'm not sure if she remembers, is that her grandmother attended the church that I was born and raised in. So my parents are still there at the church, and my dad is one of the associate ministers. And so loved your grandma, Loretta Wynn.
I did not remember that. Thank you for bringing
Yes.
it up. So my grandmother passed away last November, last year.
Yes.
So it's just been about 1 year, but she was big in her church in New Jersey. Aisha, thank you for giving me that memory. That's
Oh,
really
I just
special.
had to because I loved your grandma. Like, she's my grandma.
Well,
So
she was a character. Like, she was a light of my life, but it's not lost on me that she was a very unique person and touched a lot of people.
yeah, and so that really just kind of brings me just, like, to the first question, just in terms of, your community, in terms of your family, your upbringing. I mean, just the path from, how you were raised and how you were brought up, especially being a woman in STEM and also a woman of color in STEM, to where you are now, just kind of leading, wildlife, like, ecology, which is so cool and just so incredible. Can you share like some like pivotal moments, or influences that really guided you towards where you are now in your career?
Well, I appreciate you kind of starting this with family because I've been really meditating on this question a lot because I am a non-traditional person in a non-traditional career. And there's something about my parents and the way that my parents created this household. Both of my parents have what I think of as non-traditional careers themselves. My father is an architect and my mother is a writer. And when I was a kid, she was writing poetry. And so she was writing poems and she accumulated so many that she started self-publishing books of poetry.
Wow.
And, she wasn't like, a world famous poet, but in our community, in the town
Mm-hmm.
we lived in, she was known. And as a kid, my little brother and I would go to bookstores and sit on the floor while my mom did poetry readings, to the public. And neither of my parents chose careers that made much money. So my father's an architect, but he's a professor of architecture. So he taught architecture because he really just wanted people to love it as much as he did. And I think there's something about being raised by those two people who did what they loved for work that made me think to myself like, "Oh, well, like, let me figure out what I love and let me do that for work." And so when I was very, very young, what I loved was watching nature shows on TV, and I would watch them all. I mean, it was the, like, mid to late '80s, you were having the, PBS Nature had their shows and, David Attenborough had his shows, and there was this TV show called Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, you may have heard of it, and they were on, and that was my favorite thing to do, and I did not know anybody in the whole wide world except those nature show hosts who were interacting with wild animals in the
Mm.
wilderness, right? I knew
Yeah.
you
And let
could
me
go to.
interject, by the way, let me interject real quickly. Did you see Peter Gross on Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, who you work with now?
So, absolutely, Peter Grosz, my current co-host on the show,
Yeah.
he
That is so
he
cool.
started filming, the show, Wild Kingdom in 1985, that was the year I was born. So when I was a
Wow.
kid, he was the host of the show, and not only that, believe it or not, Peter recently shared with me that he appeared on Reading Rainbow with LeVar Burton. And so, that was my era. I watched all the Reading Rainbows, and
Yes,
I
love reading
distinctly,
Rainbow.
to this day, I mean, I just turned 39, so it must have been 30 years ago. I remember the Reading Rainbow episode where LeVar Burton meets a tiger. And that was my jam, right? It was like the nature shows and the, like, story shows, like, came together, and that was Peter Grosz's tiger, and Peter Grosz was there introducing LeVar Burton to a tiger. So, I am a scientist, and so, by training, we don't really talk about fate or destiny or
Yeah.
manifesting, but there really isn't, for me, any other way to describe how so many different things like that have come together in my professional life. Being a little kid, seeing something on TV and saying, "I want that," and now 30 years later, having exactly that with the same people, the same show, the same themes, the same conservation messaging. It's entirely surreal. Now, I mean, I, like, worked hard, right? So there's it wasn't just, like, a 30-year jump from dreaming it
Right.
to becoming it, like, there were twists and turns and all these roads, but I will say that when I was, you know, in kindergarten, I said to my teachers, to my parents, "I wanna be a nature show host when I grow up." I went to high school saying that. I went to college in Atlanta saying, "I wanna be a nature show host when I grow up," and I remember my advisor said, like, "Ugh, no one has ever brought that to me before, so
Like,
let's
oh,
park
okay.
on this. Should
Well, that's
you."
what I wanted to ask you that too. Did your parents like when a kid says, I want to be an actor, I want to be a singer, I want to be a rock and roll star. Parents go, okay, you can do that, but get a real job, get a degree, get a real job, and then you can pursue this. Did your parents encourage you being a nature show host, or do they try and steer you into more something academic, which you do have as well? But I mean, the nature show host thing is completely a left turn.
I have the academics now, but I will admit that when I was probably the most passionate about, like, "This is gonna be my career," was, like, middle school and high school, and at that point, what's interesting is that I was not performing very well in my classes. So,
Yeah.
my high school GPA was low, and I was, like, a C student. Um,
Mhm.
in my math classes, I was a D student, even in the environmental science classes, I was not, necessarily showing that I was gifted. And at the same time, I was very involved in music, and I was a classical musician, and I was doing
Wow.
great in that, and I had a lot of, potential. I was showing a lot of skills. So my parents were never discouraging, they never said, like, "Don't stop," "Stop, don't do this." They never said that. But as parents do, they did say, like, "Girl, it appears that you are maybe not supposed to go the science route, and
Right.
maybe music would
Or
be a
the
really good
arts,
fit for
music.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're really thriving in that area. So that must I mean, I'm a parent myself now, and I really see how hard that must have been for my parents who were kind of like, realizing they couldn't support me past high school, and they needed me to do well and be strong and successful. And I wasn't showing that for science and math and just a lot of academics. But I was stubborn and,
Mm.
I was like, "I love music. I really love it. I'm good at it. It is in my heart, but I don't wanna do it for a career. I don't. I want
Mm.
to make an impact in this other way. I want to show up for wildlife and wild places." And so I went to college and I said like, "Hey, I'm here." Like, the fact that I made it to college to me was like a miracle. So, I remember just deciding like, "I am here." Um, my parents are helping me pay for college with loans, right? Like,
Yeah.
not with cash, with loans. I took out loans, my dad took out loans. It was this major sacrifice, and something kind of came over me at that time when I thought to myself, "I am obligated to do well. I don't really it doesn't matter what it takes. I have to make my family proud here in college because I fought
Yeah,
for."
and that's a huge challenge. So I really appreciate you mentioning that because I think in this space where we talk about STEM, whether it's men or women, everyone says it's really tough and the myth is you have to be exceptional, especially in the
Yeah.
sciences and math. So I really appreciate you bringing that, it doesn't matter if it's something that you want to do, you're gonna stay focused and be dedicated to doing that. So that was a huge challenge for you to really overcome. I mean, besides your grades, what's maybe another challenge that you faced even going into college with this determination that this is what you wanna do?
You know what, Aisha? It's all kind of wrapped up together because now as an adult, I can reflect back and understand that it was all self-confidence. My self-confidence was low as a teenager. It was. And it wasn't because of something going on in my home life. I think it was just because of where I was. It was society. It was just whatever the circumstances were.
Yeah.
I can definitely say that my self-confidence was low the years that I was getting bad grades. They go
Mhm.
together. And I didn't have the articulation for that as a teenager, right? There was all kinds of other stuff going on. But when I got to college and I, was brave enough to walk into my calculus teacher's office hours and say,
Calculus. Wow.
"Calculus,"
They
well, 'cause
let you into calculus?
to
Wow.
be a biology major, you have to take calculus. Trust me, I tried to avoid it. And in fact, I walked into his office and I said, "Listen, I've tried this class before. I tried it in high school. I got a D. Like I barely made it to college because I had D's twice, 2 times. I retook it, and still got a D."
Wow.
And I said, "I'm bad at math." And my calculus professor, this is my freshman year of college, so I was 17, and he said, "Nobody's bad at math." And I almost walked out because I was like, "I am. I
You're like,
know
"No,
this.
I
I know
mean
it is
me."
a fact. It's not an opinion. It is a fact. I can prove it with my transcript." And he said, "It's impossible to be bad at math. The only thing you might have going on is that you don't understand it because you need extra help." And just that kind of restructuring of
Mhm.
moving out of
Mhm.
an identity of I am good at
Yeah.
Mhm.
this and bad at this to like, I have potential to understand this thing. That was one of many little shifts that contributed to my self-confidence increasing. And when my self-confidence increased as a young woman in the early 2000s, in Atlanta, I started just doing better at school. I started believing in myself. And when you believe in yourself, your life improves even in these tiny little ways. And it wasn't just that professor, it was the environment, it was all kinds of things, but I started doing well. And I started opening my mind and I started being brave and taking on different risks. And I should say I grew up very urban, a very kind of typical urban Black family in that we didn't explore the outdoors. So although, my
Yes.
interests were in wild animals and wild places, particularly international places, my family didn't have this history of, like, hiking and camping and fishing and hunting and all that kind of stuff. So I didn't have experience in the outdoors. So again, in college, I decided like, well, I'm going to get some experience. In my junior year of college, I signed up for a study abroad program that took me to southern Kenya for 5 months to study wild animals and be taught by Kenyan professors in the outdoors. I mean, we were living in tents. And that was my first. I was 20 years old when I, like, put on my first pair of hiking boots and I saw my first wild animal, and I essentially haven't looked back since.
And what was that like? I mean, just that shock of reality of I'm in the wild. Now people talk about, let's go out into nature. That's what Americans do, right? Let's go out and experience nature.
Right.
When you're in Africa, you are in
Oh,
the
yeah.
wild.
No doubt
So you're
about that.
20 years old, a kid from San Francisco. What was that visceral reaction? And I can only relate to my own personal experience. The first time I went to India, it took me 3 days just to absorb the sensory overload of the smells of the spices and the smoke, and to see the humanity and the overflow of humanity and animals inside stores because they're sacred. I mean, it's just kind of upside down world to my
Wow.
perspective. I'm just wondering what yours was.
It was all of that. I mean, I guess probably the biggest thing that I felt was ready, so
Mm.
it's hard to know what to expect, right? So I knew I was gonna
Right.
be just shocked, but I also knew I was ready. I was like, "Get me an experience." I could hate it, but I'm ready to hate it, right? I'm ready to be uncomfortable. I'm ready to love it. I'm ready just to experience what I've been seeing on TV for so long. And, you know, I had a journal, right? So I went to Kenya, like, the internet existed in a lot of places, but not in the part of Kenya where I was. This was 2005.
Oh,
Kenya
yeah.
became, like, wired kind of all over the country right after that, but there was no electricity, no
Wow.
Wi-Fi, no, flushing toilet, like, nothing like that. So I had a journal, I wrote letters, and luckily I still have those. So I distinctly remember being picked up in Nairobi at the airport with the little crew of 12, American students, and the drive, 6-hour drive down to Southern Kenya where we were staying in our camp. And eventually the paved road becomes a dirt road. And then pretty soon after you leave Nairobi, or back then, you started to see, wild animals. And I thought I was gonna see an elephant and giraffes and zebras from the side of the road. The first thing I saw was what they call a secretary bird. And I was one of those things where I was like, "Wait a second, like, what is that? That wasn't on the nature show." Like, what is
You're
and you
like,
can
"That's
see
it?"
them you can see them in a distance. They can be up to 5 feet tall, this
Oh,
huge bird with a
wow.
big bill, and they
Oh
walk
my
around the
gosh.
landscape. They look like velociraptors from a distance. And so I remember being in the car and being like, "Well, what is that? Where's the rhinoceros? I thought, what is that? There's a dinosaur over there." And, and I guess that was kind of a foreshadowing of how surprised I was gonna be for that whole semester with what my experience was, right? It wasn't always the East Africa that you saw on TV. It was complex, and it was
Yeah.
local, and it was specific, and it was surprising and always beautiful, and just a really, really wonderful, immersive time for me.
That is so interesting. Being able to have that experience and now yourself as the host, of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, protecting the wild, you get to share these stories where people can actually see them. Because similar to your experience, the first time I went to Africa, I was like in my late 20s. And so seeing it, it was like, wow, this isn't what I have always seen on television, and it's beautiful. So now you get to host the show, to be out there and to be able to have, young kids see this for themselves and have those experiences right along with you. So what has that been like to be able to like share these incredible stories?
It's been a dream come true, and I guess I mean that literally and figuratively, because it's what I always dreamed I would be able to do. Um, there's something about hosting I mean, there's a lot about hosting Wild Kingdom that's super different than what I thought it would be like. But one of them is the education, because I spent so much time getting formal education, right? So once I got the bug, once it started going well, I did college, I did grad school a couple of times, I did a postdoc, I got, research faculty positions. I was just always in a space of formal education, and that really worked for me. Hosting Wild Kingdom is so interesting because I'm constantly learning, right? So I mean, I get sent off to do a story on manatees or on coatis or on spider monkeys or on, ocelots or whatever it is. I mean, if I thought I knew a lot about wild animals before I got the great privilege of hosting this show, it has just transformed by leaps and bounds. And now I am getting these crash courses in wildlife ecology from other experts every single day. And so although I know that the program serves our viewers, I have to say it is serving me and my brain every single time I show up on camera. And that is, like, I didn't think that was gonna be part of it. I thought it was going to always be work, like giving, and there's so
Right.
much that I receive just from being at work every day, and that's
That
really
is so
special.
cool. Have there been any, like, real, like, standout moments or things that really surprised you being in this space?
Oh gosh. Um, yes.
If she
Yeah,
can't think of
yes.
one, I've got some. I've got some, but I'll let her go first.
You know, I spent so many years, and I wrote a book about this actually. Wrote a book mostly about all the years I spent doing extreme things, right? Like going to the edges of the earth and doing the absolute most for, in the name of wildlife. And it has actually been through hosting Wild Kingdom that I've kind of realized where my edges are, like where my limits actually they do exist
Yeah.
after all, and I have experienced them through hosting. So I have been humbled. I have really learned the power and importance of collaboration, right? If it weren't for my co-host, our show, man, I don't even know if it would exist, right? Like the way that I lean on him and the way that he shows up for me in my times of need are tremendous. And I definitely like my ego has definitely gotten way more in check just from hosting because it is a marathon and I've done a lot of sprinting, I think, in my career. And this is just super different.
I have a story for you. So, as you know, I'm a producer on Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, and Ray and I have shared many episodes together and many deep conversations during long drives between
Yeah.
locations. And a lot of the stories that you told me are in your book, Wildlife Finding My Purpose in an Untamed World, still available now on Amazon. And, um, but I will tell you, you are tough as nails. And I'll share this with Aisha in the audience is that we were doing a story on trying to tag and track juvenile great white sharks literally 50 yards off the beach of Santa Barbara, where Ray lives. And, wild animals are wild animals. You never know if they're going to show up or not.
Okay, I found one. It's headed right to the kayaks. The kayaks are right here. Drone is right here. It's going to be really close.
So this producer's idea was let's get Ray and her co-host Peter Gross out on kayaks in the harbor and we'll just kind of wait. And we have drones flying looking for sharks, these great white sharks. They're all juveniles, so they're 10 feet or less, but they're great white sharks.
Yeah, they're big.
And, and Ray goes, I don't do so good on the water. I'm a little seasick. Look, first of all, it was a perfect day. It was 75 degrees, flat water. It was just would you not agree, Ray? It was an epic day.
Yes, which makes it all the more pathetic. But yes, it was.
But you never know when wildlife is going to show up. Ray and Peter were out there on the kayaks for 90 minutes, just bouncing around until the first great white came around. But by that time, she was terribly, terribly seasick
Oh
and was
my goodness.
physically
I
sick.
throwing up
Oh,
on
no.
camera. It was just
She was retching over the side of the kayak, and of course we had GoPros everywhere, so we're seeing it, and she's like, "Ah." But as soon as that shark showed up, something tripped in her that just laser focuses. Oh my God, there's a great white shark literally right off the bow of my kayak. I could reach out and touch its dorsal fin if I wanted to. And her not only enthusiasm but professionalism kicked in, and it was just a phenomenal shoot and episode and experience capturing all this on film for the show, because she just stepped up, and your strength and fortitude and perseverance really just profoundly impacted me that day.
We saw it! I saw a shark! I've never seen any shark before, like outside of the aquarium or something, and this was the real deal. Right here. Not even that far.
Oh, John, that's very kind, because I was really beating myself up by like, why am I the weakest link in this in this episode? But that wasn't acting. So I will say I don't really have acting skills. It was truly like my thrill of seeing a brand new species, my thrill of being inches from a great white shark, like just how much I'm obsessed with wild animals. That's the adrenaline rush that I got that temporarily kept me from getting sick. And then I think I was right back to it.
Oh my goodness. That is such an awesome story. I know that, even the first time we met as a part of the, If Then She Can initiative, when we first came together, because, Ray had already been working with the initiative before we all came together. And so they had, huge pictures blown up of her and these black bears. And so when I saw it, I was like, "Oh my goodness, who is this petite black woman with these huge black bears?" Like I was just so in awe. Like I can't believe I am in her space. And so just to see that and to meet you, and you gave a speech and just kind of talked about your love and just how gentle the bears were. Of course, most of the time they were sleeping, but
Yeah.
still just for you to be like right next to them, like your face, like right there. I'm like, what if they wake up, at any moment? So it was just awesome because that's, again, and you mentioned this before, that's not something for, like our communities that we really see. So even as a grown woman, I was just in awe, like, wow, she's doing this. This is like the coolest thing ever.
Thank you for saying that, because I have to say, there's a difference between knowing what you want to do for work when knowing what you want to be when you grow up, and believing that you can be that when you grow up, right? And, there's this quote that I think, even in the If Then initiative, we talked about, like, if you can see it, then you can be it. When I was a kid, I wanted to be David Attenborough and Peter Grosz and Marlon Perkins and all of these, Jeff Corwin and all these Steve Irwin. I mean, the list goes on of all these nature show hosts, but I did not believe that was possible. It was very clear to me as a kid that white men, particularly middle-aged, particularly British or Australian, who
Mhm.
are super comfortable and experienced in the outdoors, they host nature shows. Right? Like, none of them on the show, my co-host involved, right? The show isn't about teaching you the path to getting there. So none of, David Attenborough never says like, I went to school for this, and then I took this job, and then I volunteered here, and this is how I got my experience, right? So for me as a kid, I remember thinking like, oh, they must, like, their dads must know about wildlife ecology. Like, they might just like talk about this at the dinner table. And I truly believed, like, I could want something, but I might as well want to go to Mars, because it's not like, people like me don't do this, and definitely urban people who've never been outside, like, Black girls don't do this. And I know that was also a part of why I was encouraged to go into music, because I had that skill. There's a lot of Black representation in music, there always has been. It's a inclusive, safer space for Black folks.
Yeah.
And so I will say today that I know a lot of Black female wildlife ecologists. I'm really proud. What by a lot, I mean like probably like just like a handful. But to me, they're people I can call at any minute. They're people I can text. Like I'm in community with them. Some of them are in the If Then program. But in practice, when I show up, it's still like race and gender and like the intersections of my identity show up a lot. And there's a lot of microaggressions that very well-intentioned, like conservation-minded people make these mistakes. And it impacts me. I mean, we were talking about black bears. I was on a shoot with John, our black bear episode, which was just one of the best. And I remember I was just like ready. Like I was probably super obnoxious for that one because I was like, this is actually my expertise. I don't have to learn anything. Like I did my PhD dissertation on this exact topic. I'm so ready. I've done it. I'm the only one in this whole crew who's actually gone into a bear den, right? Like I know what's going on. And, we're all dressed and we're ready. And I remember standing outside of our meeting place where we were going to meet with the state biologists who were coming. Great guys, and they do amazing work. And they come up and they get out of their vehicle, and there's kind of some of us in a line. John, I can't remember if you were there or not. And the the veterinarian walks up to our audio guy, and who is like a tall, very kind of like burly, bearded, maybe mid-30s white guy, beanie, and says, "You must be our bear biologist." And he kinda looks around, and I'm standing right next to him, right? And he looks around and he's like, "Oh, no, I'm just the sound guy." And he points down at me, I'm much shorter, and he's like, "She's the bear expert on our team." And again, like, immediately, the person we were meeting was so apologetic, right?
Of
He's like, "Oh my
course,
gosh, I'm so
yes.
sorry, like, nice
Yeah,
to meet you. I was looking for Dr. Wynn-Grant. I didn't realize it was
yeah.
you." But that's an example of something that I get every single day, right? Not just
Mhm.
like once a year when I'm doing the show.
Right.
Every single day, people have a perception of who's a biologist, who has a PhD, like who spends time in the outdoors, who could a nature show host be? And they think it could not possibly, subconsciously believe that it could not possibly be a millennial black woman of this size, shape, or, like,
Yeah.
appearance. And so that's hard, right? I'm still constantly being told that I don't belong or I'm unusual. And that, again, self-confidence and self-esteem still
Mhm.
plays a big role in my life and my energy and my commitment and my motivation and my morale for work. And so I love hosting the show because it's what I wanna spend my time doing, and I also hope it provides this representation that the world needs to understand that, like, anybody under the sun belongs in this space and can do it and should be a part of the environmental movement in whatever way they want to be.
You know what I really like about what you do and how you bill yourself is you're a scientist, an ecologist, and an activist. And I like that. I think it's very impressive to me because you can step into both or all three areas. You can use your science mind, your degree as an ecologist, a large carnivore ecologist,
There you go.
and yeah, and we'll get to that in just a second. But also an activist to talk about, you know, pushing those boundaries of assumed, not expected, but
Yes.
just assumed. The other thing on that shoot that you talked about that I thought was a little disarming, I didn't hear that interaction with the veterinarian, but what kind of threw me on that shoot a little bit was the fact that you have a higher degree than these wildlife biologists for the state that we were at, and yet they wouldn't let you go with them to investigate the bear den. We had to stay back, and they went
No
in,
way. Are you
investigated
serious?
the bear den, and then they sedated the bear. Then once the bear was sedated, then they let us come in. And I'm like going, why didn't Ray get to go? The whole plan initially was for her to be embedded with them while they were doing this, and they said, no, you can't go. And I don't. I was really. Did they ever give you an explanation for that, Ray?
They didn't. No, they didn't. They didn't. I mean, Who knows? It could be an actual protocol where, like, if you are not an employee of that agency,
Mm.
you
For
can't do it.
insurance reasons, liability,
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
so I wanna just give the benefit of the doubt, but it could also have been, biases. It could also have been, just perceptions. Um,
Yeah.
it could've. And again, that's, John knows how to make TV, so we didn't push, and we ended up getting really amazing content. But it can be hard, I've had not at any point in the Wild Kingdom experience, but in other spaces, I have had really difficult experiences with people who it's hard for them to accept that I might be more qualified for something or
Mm.
more experienced with something scientific and outdoorsy and, wildlife oriented than they are.
Can you go back to your experience in Africa a little bit? Because I want to hear about that inflection point of your experience with the wildlife there that impacted you so much that you became a specialized large carnivore ecologist. But not only that, what you saw the impact of nature by humans and what we need to be doing and why conservation is important that everybody should be thinking about. Even if you live in the city and really don't
Mm.
go out into the wild too often or even hiking in the mountains, but why conservation is important.
Yeah. So I have to admit that a big part of why I chose to be a carnivore ecologist is because of the nature shows. It just is, right? Like if you looked at a nature show from, my era, it was going to be a lion or a tiger or a shark or a polar bear, like,
Yeah.
some big, like meat eating animal, right? We call them charismatic megafauna. So part of me was totally biased towards like that kind of thing, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I have colleagues and friends who are, who study like soil microbes, and arguably they are way more important than any like large mammal, but it's just not as glamorous, right? But another part of me, I was in Kenya, I was getting my first experience outdoors, very immersive. I was being taught by Black Kenyan professors who had grown up in that space and then left for England or the United States for their PhDs and their faculty positions and come back to teach. And I was originally put on a research project there looking at zebras and looking at how zebras were following water as it was being diverted from natural water sources into farms. And there's this
Mm.
whole history. The region where we were was traditionally pastoralist, right? So people did not farm, they herded their cattle all over the place. But with colonialism in Kenya and with kind of globalization and capitalism, really coming through, people started having to like own small bits of land and you couldn't graze your cattle everywhere. So agriculture and farming became more important and you needed to irrigate your farm. And so you're taking a stream and diverting the water here. Well, the zebras needed to follow the water in order for them to drink every day. And so they were following them into these farms and it was causing problems. Well, although that was my research, you know, zebras are following water, but what's following a zebra, right? Like a carnivore is. And
Mhm.
so people were experiencing carnivores coming into their bomas, which are their homesteads, right? In a way that wasn't happening before, right? Carnivores were never coming to people's huts back when
Yeah.
people were, kind of living this migratory pastoralist lifestyle. So I started learning about the lions, the hyenas, the cheetahs, the leopards that were coming into closer proximity to human activity because they were following their prey, the zebras. And very naturally in my research, I started asking all these questions about the carnivores. I'm like, well, how's this impacting their ecology? And, you know, how many of these lions are left? And are people, you know, killing lions in retaliation for lions like, coming close to them? And very naturally, my interests became of the carnivores. And that turned into a different research project, which turned into a, graduate school project,
Yeah.
and it just built from there. And one thing that's very cool in the scientific context is that the ecology of one carnivore, like let's say lions, I studied lions in Tanzania for my master's degree. the ecology of carnivores can be similar across species, right? So
Mm.
a lion has some similarities to a polar bear, to a, Tasmanian devil. I mean, carnivores have shared ecologies. And so I found that theory to be very interesting, and it brought me to studying bears in North America and, and different animals all over the world. Um, and so that's the story of how it got started was me just kind of scaling up to see a bigger picture
Mhm.
of what was going on when people were changing the landscape. And to answer your question, John, that's where I think my advocacy kicks in and kind of intersects with conservation because conservation is important, right? Like we need biodiversity on this planet. We are part of biodiversity and we need all of the biodiversity on this planet to maintain, to thrive, to flourish in order for the earth to keep spinning the way we need it to and for humans to be able to enjoy it. But a lot of what is changing on planet Earth and what has changed in the last 100 years has been a result of colonialism and has been a
Mhm.
result of the oppression of a lot of peoples in a lot of places. If we talk about Africa, Asia, South America, Australia, these are places that have been colonized in the last 100 or 200 years, and the landscapes have been changed primarily for the benefit of one powerful group of people. And so social justice really intersects with environmental conservation because we need to rebalance power structures in so many of these places if we're going to help restore ecosystems to where they need to be. And you don't learn that in school. You kind of learn that from being in southern Kenya and seeing how, like a lot of people don't want to have farms, but they have to because colonialism has shaped the entire landscape. And you learn it from being in Madagascar and seeing how poverty is driving people into the forest to chop down wood, but the poverty stems from colonial rule. And you get it from being in even when I was in working in the Western United States, right? Where it's like, you know, traditionally white communities in these little mountain towns who are poaching black bears and selling their gallbladders on the black market, right?
Yeah.
Under-resourced communities, no matter what race you're talking about, are less likely to contribute to conservation efforts, right? When communities have the resources and the wellness that they need, then they're gonna be like, "Great, how can we help?" Right? And so that is something that I really came into, and it's been a big part of my expression and my public speaking and a lot of my work is to really show people that wellness, right? Environmental wellness includes human wellness, and in a lot of ways that includes social justice.
And my only experience with that, I worked on another show where I did a story on the effects of the eradication of the apex predator, the gray wolf from Yellowstone. And it was eradicated because ranchers didn't want wolves around their cattle.
Yeah.
Hunters didn't want wolves competing with their elk hunt. And so this apex predator, which is a keystone animal in any ecosystem, was eradicated in the early 19 teens in Yellowstone. This magical place that we all love, one of the first national park in North America and the most amazing natural national park in America, began collapsing.
Mhm.
And not until the late 90s did the science go, oh my God, this has been a huge mistake. We have to reintroduce the predators because the reason when you take away the apex predator, what happens? The elk population explodes. When the elk population explodes, they eat all the willows. And when they eat all the willows, then that changes the course of the rivers. And then the
Mhm.
beavers hightail it out of there. It's just a collapse. And, but it was all because of profit. It's all because of, oh, my ranching is being affected and my hunting is being affected. Get rid of all this. And it's just not necessarily colonialism per se, but I mean, it's the same thing. And, nature is there for a reason. It's a grand design, and we just really have to learn how to live with it. And that's, I think, what conservation should really be, is we have to live with it as human beings and know that we're just part of it. We don't own it. It's not all ours to do whatever we want. We have to live in harmony with it.
I could you took the words out of my mouth, and, and sometimes people think that you either have to choose between being kind of a hyper capitalist or, like,
Mm,
a hippie tree hugger, right? And truly, there is I think that most conservationists today understand that we're operating in a capitalist system, and we're gonna. Like, it's not going
yeah.
anywhere, right? And so understanding how we can just do sustainable capitalism, right? So, like, have your ranch, whatever, make money from your land, but do it in a renewable way so that it's not constantly depleting your space and the spaces around it, but can be renewing to all those spaces so that we can have this, kind of sustainability, right? Of this is so that's where the term sustainability came from. It's just understanding like we're trapped in capitalism, right? It is among us worldwide, but there's a way to do it in a green way, in a sustainable way that will keep us afloat and ultimately will strengthen everything and everyone.
Yeah. I mean, it's so fascinating. And I just think with all of your titles and your accolades and everything that you've talked about, you mentioned earlier your daughter. So, mom being one of them as well. And so, because, your upbringing is definitely different than hers and just the resources and the exposure that she has from you, what advice do you give her or would you give a young person who may, struggle with self-confidence in
Mm.
anything that they wanna do?
Well, I have 2 daughters these days, and which is wild because sometimes I
It
still
was
think that
wild because I remember when I met you, you just had your one daughter.
just 1, and I was like, "That's enough, 1 is plenty. I'm done. Shop's closed." And now here
Yeah,
we
I
are.
had twins, so I just had 2 at one time
Oh
and
my
got it over with.
gosh. Yeah. Oh, God bless you.
Yeah,
So
really.
so if I had this is something that I actually preach and I really believe in. So it's mostly for like kids in school, right? So school age kids who are getting grades, and this obviously comes from my own experience. But I try to tell parents to believe in passion over performance. Because I
Mm,
truly think in this day and age, when we are so much more aware of learning differences and test taking and just
yeah.
kind of like what kind of evaluations can help us understand who's going to contribute really well to a field. I really think that, looking at someone's grades and deciding whether or not they'll be good at A, B, and C is just not a good evaluation. And I think that if a child has passion for something, that should be nurtured over their performance. And listen, it worked for me, right? I was not performing well in science and math classes, but somehow I was destined to be a scientist who uses high-level math every day in her research and makes an impact. And for these mission critical fields, right? So it's different if it's like you're just trying to like, I don't know, make money for a big corporation that doesn't really impact the world. But for environmental work, for medical, health work, for social work, for anything that is really important for societies and the planet, I really think we should have fewer barriers to entry.
Mhm.
I think that we need more people from different perspectives and backgrounds and abilities and skill sets to be participating in mission critical work for this planet rather than saying like, "Oh, but like your SAT score wasn't quite high enough, so like choose something else." So that is something that I really preach. I mean, I want kids to like work hard and study hard and do their homework and, do what they're supposed to do to their best ability, but to never think they don't belong in a space because their performance is not matching their passion.
Yeah, no, I really love that.
I want to point out something that I don't know if a lot of people know, and I didn't have a chance to read all of your book. I'm not sure if it's in your book or not, but you were offered not once, but twice by the President of the United States of America to head up U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and you turned it down both times. That's quite a tap from the highest office in the land, and you said no what was it that made you say no? And do you have any regrets, or you think that, hey, maybe there's a chance I'll be able to do it later in life?
Well, it was the hardest professional decision I've ever had to make, that's for sure. It entailed a lot of sobbing on the floor, you know, which is interesting because I used to, I think, sob on the floor when things were bad, and I found myself in early 2021 like, sobbing on the floor because I had so many great options in front of me, and that was
Mhm.
overwhelming, and so what a huge blessing, right? I mean, just a tremendous blessing
Yes.
and a huge honor that, that I was given, and the reason I ultimately said no there's actually a few reasons, and 2 of the 3 of them are in the book, but one was that the day they gave me a deadline, right? Like, "Girl, you have to decide if you're taking this job or not by this deadline." The deadline they gave me was January 6th, 2021,
Oh my
and
Mm.
goodness.
that is an
Oh,
important day in American
yeah.
history.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, and I remember,
A
like,
sign from the heavens of some kind.
Yeah.
kind of a
Wow.
sign. I woke up on January
Wow.
6th and I was kind of like, "Obviously, I'm gonna take this job." I still feel conflicted, but, like, clearly this is, the most important honor I've ever been given. And then, like, turn on the news and you realize, like, Washington DC is in chaos and
Oh
Congress
my
people are
goodness.
hiding under their desks and, the vice president is trying to avoid being killed. So I took a pause and I said, "You know what? I bet no one's checking their email today. Maybe I can get another day or 2 out of making this decision." And also, like, the federal government doesn't seem to be a safe place right now.
Right.
So that was interesting. That was some kind of divine intervention. The thing that was really on my mind and the ultimate reason why I turned it down, there's 2 again, was that I knew very squarely in my heart that science was really important to me, but it takes a lot of energy. And I've always known that although science is for me, I won't always have the energy to be an active research scientist, right? Like at some point, it's like, I'm tired, I'm tapped out. But at that point, I still had it. I really still had that fire. And I thought to myself, I think I'm only going to have this for another 5 or 10 years. And so I want to be in there. I want to be in the field. I want to be collaring black bears. I want to be like dreaming up research questions. I want to be mentoring students. And I have the energy today. And I think that's important. And then the third reason is that even though I had no idea and nothing was clear, there's nothing on the horizon, I strongly believed that I was going to host a nature show. I really believed that it was going to
Mm.
happen.
Mm.
And I mean, I just,
Wow.
like I couldn't expect that's why I was sobbing on the floor because I was like, "I could be
Wow.
crazy. I really this could be a big mistake. How do I know this? I don't know. I don't know." But I
You
just
trusted your gut.
I
You
Yeah.
trusted
trusted
your gut.
I did. I felt like I had never been so close. I felt like I was close. I think that's what it was. That's, like, the better way for me to say it. I had this feeling that I was closer than I had ever been to the opportunity to host a nature show. And I knew that if I went into this very important, very serious, very formal role in the federal government that I wouldn't, A, like, have that option, I can't, like, do both.
Yeah.
And B, I probably would not continue to be viewed as someone who would be, like, great for TV. And I just that was in my heart, and I took a big risk by saying no, and I also, again, knew myself, and I knew
Yeah.
how fiery I get when it comes to social justice stuff and the messages that I have, and I knew that compromise was probably something that I'd get to at some point in my life, but, like, at that moment, and even still today, I was like, "I don't think I can compromise."
Right
I
now.
think if they put me in charge of fish and wildlife, like, I'm gonna, like, end hunting, like, just entirely, and then,
Wow,
I'll get
wow.
fired. So I just knew that, like, I wasn't ready to practice diplomacy, and
Mm.
compromise in my work with
Mm.
wild animals.
Do you feel there's a correlation between your experience as a biologist, a wildlife biologist, being in nature, around nature, in dangerous situations, to learn how to trust that intuitive voice inside yourself to say, I'm going to do this and not that, and how that can inspire people to make the best choices for their own lives?
Ooh, that's kinda deep. I haven't been asked that before. I was just thinking about this the other day. I was on an airplane, with my nine-year-old daughter, and I was thinking about, like, we're very different. I mean, luckily, we get along. We're just 2 peas in a pod, but we're very different personality-wise, and I was thinking to myself, I really hope she's the kind of person who will save her own life in an emergency. 'Cause you know how they
Mm.
say, I don't know, experts
Yes.
say that,
Put
like, there
on
are
your
people.
stuff
Yeah,
first
there are
and
people
yeah.
who, who are, like, will kind of not even panic, but, like, not decide, like, kind of be like, "Oh, no, am I gonna be saved?" And people who are like, "I'm gonna get out of this alive."
Yeah.
And I feel very strongly that I am that kind of person who's like, "Oh, I'm gonna survive. I mean, I might not survive, but I'm gonna work really hard to save my own life, or I'm gonna work really hard to improve my conditions, or I'm gonna work really hard to get out of this bad situation." And and I was kind of, like, praying that my daughter has that in her too, and hopefully she'll never need to figure that out. But I've had these different periods in my life where I have been, like, camping in a tent by myself in the African savannah with carnivores afoot, and, I've had these times in my life where I've overcome very serious illnesses. I've had times in my life, I mean, I was a single mom, for several years trying to just, like, make it in a really difficult social situation. And I have had a lot of times where I have decided, John, to use your word, I've been very decisive that I am going to do everything possible to improve my situation or to make it or to
Mm.
not even to succeed, but just to see what happens, right? I've been willing to fail. I've failed in lots of ways. Things have gone wrong. I've made poor choices for sure. But I have always had it in me to make a decision and follow through with it. And and I think that and I know that that's helped me in biology. I know that's helped me with wild animals. I know that's helped me survive some, like, near-death experiences in the field. I know that it's helped me professionally when things are in my control, and as we all know, like, professionally, not everything is in your control,
Right.
right? Um But it is something that is in me that I want more people to try on for themselves because you never know what's gonna happen, but it feels really good to know that you gave something your all.
Yeah, I mean, I love just you can hear it, your passion, for your work and just everything that you do. You definitely dream big. So what would you say is like next? I mean, you have your show. Have you been thinking about that? Or are you just like, okay, I'm gonna kind of stay with this and, see what happens and where it goes from here?
The show is my everything. I mean, it kind of has to be because it takes 110% of my time. John can attest to this. It takes 110% of his time. Um, I I ju gosh, as much as I want to do more work for the environment, I will, um, I also am very, very interested in creating a parallel identity. I've definitely
Mm.
realized in the last few years that, like, I'm like, "Oh, my whole identity is wild animals." Like, that's it. Like, that's all I think about, that's all I read about, that's all I do with my time, that's all I, post about on social media, that's it. And so I'm really interested in actually exploring, kind of what other things bring me joy. It's a huge blessing to gain joy through my work. Not everyone has that, and I appreciate that a lot. But I also am kind of like, "Oh, maybe I'll start a garden," or, like, maybe I'll, learn how to play tennis, or maybe I will, volunteer at my kid's school. I thought about, like, getting in the ocean, right? I've had all this time for Wild Kingdom being on the ocean and boats, but I thought, like, "Oh, maybe I'll should I surf? Should I swim? So my New Year's resolution for 2025 is to expand my identity to something that is not in service to anyone or anything or even the planet, but something that's just for me.
For
Because I think that
yourself.
that will be restorative in a way that I can continue to give back to the earth.
Love that.
Wish me luck.
Based on your, we should all do it. We should all do it. But I'm just kind of curious, based on your experience with humanity and with nature and wildlife, is it safe to say that females really run the show here on the planet and the guys should just like shut up and step back a little bit? Really?
Oh, I have a whole theory here on this. I actually, you heard it here first. I'm working, or maybe, John, I may have admitted this to you, like in one of our 8-hour long car rides, but I have an idea for a book, which would be my second book, which is all about the female of the species and really looking at
Yeah.
wildlife
Absolutely.
ecology from the perspective of female animals, because obviously we're not going to have, name a species, gorillas. We don't get more gorillas without females being really well. And that's the same for human societies, right? Like we need women of all types and all different social classes to be really well in order for our species to continue. And so I think there's this, it's arguably a feminist lens through which we might look at the natural world could be really helpful for reaching our goals sooner.
I totally agree. And my wife told me to say that.
Because she's a smart woman. I know for a fact, I've met John's wife, Dana. She is a smart, powerful,
Yes.
strong, really cool, and also beautiful woman. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. And having said that, I'll let Aisha wrap out the show and I'll just sit back and be quiet now.
There you go. He learns. He learns quickly.
This has just been an awesome time with you, Rae, and just, learning so much and the fact that you give so much of yourself around your work. And now you're dedicated to really thinking about your own self, right? Outside of your work and what you want to do. I think that that's super important for everyone as well, because, with the rat race of just trying to climb higher and, increase and get more, I think we don't spend enough time to really just kind of sit with ourselves and figure out, like, what else do I like to do? We're not just monolithic, right? We have so many thoughts and ideas and beliefs. And so I think it's really important to be able to explore all those different things. And I don't know about yourself, but I know, like, even in upbringing, right? My parents were like, this is what you should focus on. You stay on this track, and that's really it. And
Mm.
so, I think for, myself and raising my children, I tell them, whatever you want to do, explore it. You have so many different options. So I think that, we are going more in that direction, in that space where we can think about more of who we are and all of the different facets that come with it, and how many of those facets can really, like you said, intersect and intertwine. So I feel like that has really shown and come through and really just resonated in our conversation.
Thank you so much. This was a particularly great and thoughtful interview. Two people that I really love talking to and admire a lot and miss. I miss you, Aisha. I think you get me and you're just open to hearing my opinion. Like one thing I like to
Yeah.
talk about is my opinion on things. And, and I really appreciate being able to kind of workshop them with you all. So thank you.
Thank you for spending this time with us. We really appreciate it.
Yay.
We'll see you on the road. We'll see you on the road.
You'll see me on the road.
I'll be
Yeah.
watching.
Yay. Wow.
Thank you.
I'm
A
traveling.
shameless plug, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, Protecting the Wild, co-starring Dr. Rae Wynn-Grant, Saturdays on NBC or Peacock.
That's right. Season 2 is in full swing.
Ask yourself this question: why is conservation so important?
For over 60 years, we've explored stories of hope from across the animal world.
Hi. Join us on new adventures for a new generation.
This is Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, protecting the wild.
Ignition Sequence is produced by Exhilarating Media, a nonprofit organization dedicated to inspiring a lifelong pursuit of knowledge. The podcast is made possible in part by viewers and listeners like you. If you'd like to support our work and help us continue bringing Ignition Sequence and other programs to a global audience, please visit exhilaratormedia.org and click the donation button. Your contribution helps fuel our mission to ignite curiosity and empower future world changers. Listen, learn, repeat.